Good evening. August, a month of oppressive humidity and the slow realization that you haven't done anything you wanted to do. But this August, something else is happening. Millions of Americans could lose benefits, face legal risks, and most won't see it coming. This is happening right now, quietly, through new laws and policy changes. It's the bureaucratic equivalent of a silent but deadly fart in a crowded elevator. It's a slow-motion car crash of policy, and you might just be in the back seat, blissfully unaware. Tonight we are going to pull back the curtain on the bureaucratic wizardry that could seriously mess up your life. Let's get into it. Let's talk about everyone's favorite government agency, the IRS. For decades, Americans have had a complicated relationship with the IRS. You file your taxes, and if you're lucky, the government sends you a refund check. But what if that refund suddenly shrank or vanished entirely? Thanks to some recent clarifications to the tax code, that's precisely the new reality for many, especially freelancers. Rules for deducting home office expenses and software subscriptions have been drastically tightened, retroactively. A key change involves the reclassification of gig economy income and associated deductions. The IRS has narrowed the definition of legitimate business expenses for independent contractors. The laptop you bought for work? Suddenly, only 50% deductible. The justification is closing loopholes and ensuring fairness. They aren't going after multinational corporations. Instead, they're targeting the little guy. It's the classic strategy of shaking down the people least able to fight back. Let's talk about the child tax credit. During the pandemic, the expanded child tax credit was a lifeline that lifted millions of children out of poverty. Congress promptly let it expire. It gets worse. A new provision slipped into a massive budget bill has altered the eligibility requirements for the child tax credit. The safety net is now gone. Imagine Maria, a single mother in Ohio. Under the new rules, her income is now too low to receive the full credit. She is being punished for being poor. It's not just unhelpful, it's insulting. The IRS received a significant funding boost, but not for customer service. It's for enforcement and new technology. The IRS is rolling out a new AI-powered system designed to flag returns for audits. This system cross-references everything, including your social media posts. This is the new reality of tax enforcement. IRS audit data is heavily skewed. Lower-income filers are audited at a rate 5 times higher than everyone else. So, the AI is learning to be biased and target the poor. We've essentially built a robot that's programmed to be a classist jerk. You get a letter that you've been selected for a correspondence audit. Now the burden of proof is on you. You have to prove that the $50 you received on Venmo wasn't undeclared income. For someone working 2 jobs, it's a terrifying, time-consuming ordeal. It's a dragnet approach that assumes guilt and forces you to prove your innocence. They've unleashed a digital bloodhound to harass the most vulnerable taxpayers. For years, Medicaid has been a political football, but during the pandemic, a crucial protection was put in place. States were forbidden from kicking people off their Medicaid rolls. This was called the continuous coverage requirement, and it was a simple, humane acknowledgement that people shouldn't lose their doctor in the middle of a global health crisis. Well, the public health emergency is over, and so is that protection. A provision passed quietly in a spending bill last year gave states the green light to begin what they are euphemistically calling the unwinding. That's a nice, gentle word, isn't it? Unwinding. It sounds like something you do with a glass of wine and a good book. But what it actually means is a bureaucratic purge of historic proportions. States are now required to redetermine the eligibility of every single person on their Medicaid rolls. And they're doing it with breathtaking and often catastrophic speed and inefficiency. The process is a nightmare. People who have been covered for years are suddenly required to re-enroll, a process that involves navigating clunky state websites, mailing in dozens of documents, and waiting on hold for hours. And here's the kicker. The vast majority of people being kicked off Medicaid so far are being disenrolled for procedural reasons. Not because they are no longer eligible, but because their paperwork got lost in the mail. Because they didn't receive the notification letter that was sent to an old address. Because they couldn't get through the jammed phone lines to confirm their information. They are losing their health care because of a typo or a misplaced stamp. This isn't a bug in the system, it's a feature. Several states are using this unwinding as an opportunity to slash their Medicaid rolls as quickly as possible using automated systems that are notoriously error-prone. They are prioritizing speed over accuracy, and the human cost is staggering. We are talking about millions of people, a huge percentage of them children being stripped of their health insurance overnight. One day you have a card that lets you see a doctor, get prescriptions, and go to the emergency room. The next day, that card is just a useless piece of plastic, and you are one accident or illness away from financial ruin. This is not an abstract policy debate. This is happening to real people right now. Let me tell you about John. John is a 68-year-old retired veteran living in a small town in Arizona. He served his country for 20 years. He relies on Medicaid to manage his diabetes and a heart condition. His modest pension puts him right on the edge of eligibility, but he's always qualified. Last week he got a letter. It was dense, full of bureaucratic language, but the message was clear. His Medicaid coverage would be terminated in 30 days. The reason cited was failure to provide requested income verification. The thing is, John never received a request for income verification. The state says they sent it to his address on file. But John moved apartments in the same complex 6 months ago and updated his address with the post office, the VA, and Social Security. But somehow, the state Medicaid office never got the memo. So the most important piece of mail he could have possibly received was sent to an empty apartment, returned to sender, and his case was automatically closed by a computer program that flagged him as unresponsive. A lifetime of service, a precarious health situation, all undone by a clerical error. Now, John is in a panic. He spends his days on the phone being transferred from one department to another, each time having to retell his story to someone who has no power to help him. He needs to refill his insulin prescription next month, a drug that costs hundreds of dollars without insurance. He's supposed to see his cardiologist for a follow-up, but he can't afford the visit out of pocket. He's asking himself, could this happen to someone in your family? And the terrifying answer is, yes, absolutely. If you have an elderly parent, a sibling with a disability, or a friend working a low-wage job who relies on Medicaid, they are at risk. John's story is not an anomaly. It is one of millions. We are witnessing a slow-motion nationwide health crisis unfold, not because of a virus, but because of paperwork. It's a tragedy of incompetence and indifference. State governments, in their rush to unwind, have created a system designed to fail the very people it's supposed to serve. They've turned a lifeline into a labyrinth, and they've set a timer. For people like John, the clock is ticking, and the stakes could not be higher. This is the human cost of a policy passed quietly in the dead of night. So why is this happening? Why are states being so aggressive, so careless with people's lives? Well, for some, it's ideological. There are politicians who have always viewed Medicaid as an expensive handout and are happy to see the rolls shrink, regardless of the human cost. They see this unwinding not as a public health challenge, but as a fiscal opportunity. A chance to cut costs by cutting people. They will point to shrinking enrollment numbers as a success, a sign of fiscal responsibility, ignoring the fact that those numbers represent real people who are now sicker and poorer. For other states, it's a matter of pure incompetence. They are underfunded, understaffed, and rely on ancient, creaking computer systems that were probably outdated when the Macarena was a popular dance. They simply do not have the capacity to handle this massive undertaking in a careful, humane way. So they automate. They set aggressive deadlines. They put the entire burden on the enrollee to navigate a system that is fundamentally broken. It's like asking someone to assemble a 10,000-piece IKEA bookshelf, but the instructions are in Swedish, half the screws are missing, and if you fail, you die. The consequences of this will ripple through our entire healthcare system for years. When people lose preventative care, they get sicker. They stop managing chronic conditions like diabetes and asthma. They skip medications, and where do they end up? In the emergency room, which is legally required to treat them, but is the most expensive and inefficient place to receive care. The costs don't just disappear, they get shifted. They get shifted to hospitals in the form of uncompensated care, which then get shifted to everyone else in the form of higher insurance premiums. So, congratulations. Even if you're not on Medicaid, you'll end up paying for this mess. This is a wholly manufactured crisis. It was predictable, and it was preventable. The federal government could have given states more time, more resources, and stricter rules to protect people from procedural denials. But they didn't. They essentially handed states a loaded gun and looked the other way. And now, millions of our most vulnerable citizens are facing the consequences. It's a colossal failure of government at every level, a testament to a system that prioritizes budgets over bodies and paperwork over people. It's a national disgrace, happening one termination letter at a time. Right, moving on. And if the idea of the government quietly slashing your healthcare benefits didn't make you want to chug an entire bottle of Pepto-Bismol, then buckle up, because our next topic is a real gut punch. Let's talk about citizenship. For most naturalized citizens, the day you take that oath is supposed to be the end of a long, arduous journey. It's the finish line. You get a tiny flag, you swear allegiance, and you can finally start complaining about the DMV with righteous indignation. It's a beautiful, tear-jerking, bureaucratic moment. A moment that is supposed to be permanent. But what if it wasn't? What if that certificate, that symbol of belonging and security, had an invisible asterisk next to it? An asterisk that years later could be activated by a faceless bureaucrat in a windowless office in Washington, D.C. That's the unnerving reality we need to talk about right now. Because the Department of Justice has quietly initiated a sweeping review of naturalized citizens, and the criteria they're using are alarmingly vague. It's like finding out the deed to your house was written in disappearing ink. You thought you owned it, but at any moment it could just poof. This isn't some far-fetched hypothetical, this is happening. The DOJ is actively reviewing the citizenship status for thousands upon thousands of people. And look, on the surface, the government's line is they're only targeting individuals who may have committed fraud during their application process. And yes, of course, nobody wants people to lie their way into citizenship. That's a fundamentally reasonable position. If you claimed you were a Nobel Prize-winning astrophysicist who cured baldness and it turns out you just own a suspiciously successful wig shop, then yes, perhaps we should have a little chat. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is the ambiguity. The process is being supercharged by new data mining technologies that can flag discrepancies in paperwork from decades ago. A simple clerical error, a mistyped date, a forgotten address from 20 years back. Things that were once considered minor administrative hiccups could now be reinterpreted as deliberate deception. It's a retroactive game of gotcha, where the rules can change after the game is supposedly over. You're being graded on a test you took in 1998 using a 2024 answer key, and the penalty for failure isn't a bad grade, it's deportation. So, how did we get here? Well, it all started with Operation Janice. Janice, the two-faced Roman god of beginnings and endings. This initiative began with the goal of identifying individuals who used different identities to gain immigration benefits. The potential for horrifying discoveries is immense. Initially, the stated target was catching serious criminals who slipped through the cracks, but the scope has since expanded dramatically. It's a perfect storm of big data meeting big bureaucracy, creating a system that is incredibly efficient at finding needles in haystacks. A simple clerical error could unravel everything. The mere existence of this program casts a chilling shadow over all naturalized citizens. It fundamentally changes the promise of American citizenship. So, who is in the crosshairs? The Department of Justice isn't handing out flyers with the answer. The reviews seem to be disproportionately affecting people who naturalized decades ago, before digital records. It's a digital witch hunt for analog errors. Think about someone like your neighbor, the elderly gentleman from Cambodia. For over 30 years, he's been as American as apple pie. But now the algorithm flags an inconsistency and suddenly, he's under review. This creates a two-tiered system of citizenship. Naturalized citizens are now being told their belonging is provisional, subject to endless review. It undermines the very essence of the melting pot ideal. A single misplaced comma from their past could be used to eject them at any time. It injects fear and instability into the lives of millions of our fellow Americans. You're thinking your state will look after you. Well, think again. Now we get to the part of our legislative horror show where the federal government decides to play a fun game of budgetary Jenga with state-level funding. Spoiler alert. Your essential services are the wobbly block that's about to be yanked out. State aid is the financial lifeblood that flows from the federal government to your state, funding everything from your kids' school lunches to the upkeep of that bridge you cross every day. It's the quiet, unassuming foundation of a functioning society. And that foundation is now being systematically dismantled under the guise of new federal budget rules. This is a full-blown suspension of critical funds. Their most vulnerable citizens look on, wondering why the safety net they were promised now has a gaping hole in it. The scariest part? The sheer speed and brutality of it all. Instead, this is a financial guillotine. Families who depend on these programs for their very survival could lose that support literally overnight. And it's happening right now. So, the federal spigot has been turned off. What happens next? When that money vanishes, a catastrophic domino effect begins. The first domino to fall is, invariably, social services, but it doesn't stop there. The next domino is education, and then comes the final, biggest domino Even if you don't directly use any of these services, you are not immune. It's a carpet bomb aimed at the very fabric of our communities. It all feels so big, so insurmountable, so profoundly stupid. But abject despair is not a strategy. The architects of these cuts are banking on your apathy, and that is where the first glimmer of hope appears, proving them wrong. The moment we decide this is a problem, their calculus starts to fall apart. Understand how your state is being affected. Contact your state representative and senator. Support the local organizations on the front lines. Amplify their message. Turn a desperate whisper into a roar they can't ignore. This is a political choice, and political choices can be changed through overwhelming public pressure. Okay, deep breath. You get to the airport, hand them your driver's license, the very same one you've used 100 times before. The agent looks at it and says, "Sorry, this isn't valid for air travel. Welcome to Real ID enforcement." The Real ID Act was passed way back in 2005. Look at your license. Does it have a star on it? If it doesn't, that little piece of plastic is about to become as useful for air travel as a chocolate teapot. It's a looming logistical nightmare. Millions of Americans are sleepwalking toward a travel ban of their own making. Okay, so your license doesn't have a star? This is where the fun begins. Getting a real ID isn't as simple as waltzing into the DMV and saying, "1 star, please." Instead, you must embark upon a heroic quest through paperwork hell to prove that you are, in fact, you. First, you'll need to gather your sacred documents like a U.S. birth certificate or a valid passport. You'll also need proof of your social security number, your actual card. Then you need 2 documents proving your current residency, like utility bills or lease agreements. You must present yourself in person at a DMV office. You will take a number, sit in a plastic chair, and you will wait. Someone will scrutinize your documents with the intensity of a bomb disposal expert. Rejection. You are sent back to the beginning of the quest. So you might be thinking this is just a pain if you don't fly much, if only it were that simple. While boarding a plane is the most commonly cited reason for needing a real ID, it is far from the only one. The enforcement of this act extends to accessing most federal facilities. This has profound implications that go far beyond travel. Consider the most vulnerable among us. How many people will simply give up, losing access to benefits they are legally entitled to, all because of this bureaucratic roadblock? This is bound to create chaos and confusion not just for citizens, but for law enforcement and other officials. It's a solution in search of a problem that creates a dozen new problems in its wake. So no, this isn't just an airport problem, it's an access problem, a bureaucracy problem, and a fairness problem. So please check your ID. So, there you have it, a whirlwind tour through the legislative minefield of August. We've seen how the federal government can snatch away state aid, leaving our communities high and dry. We've seen how a decade-old rule about driver's licenses is about to cause travel chaos for millions of unsuspecting people. It's a lot to take in, and frankly, it's enough to make you want to build a bunker and communicate exclusively through carrier pigeon. It feels relentless, a constant barrage of policies and regulations designed to make life just a little bit harder, a little more precarious, especially for those already struggling to keep their heads above water. And look, I get it. It's easy to feel powerless in the face of all this. These decisions are made in far-off Capitol buildings by people whose names we barely know. The rules are written in dense, impenetrable legalese, and the consequences often don't become clear until they land directly on our own doorsteps. But we cannot afford to be cynical. We cannot afford to be complacent. Apathy is the oxygen that bad policy breathes. Our attention, our outrage, and our collective action are the only things that can suffocate it. Information is your shield, and engagement is your sword. Staying informed is not a passive activity, it is an act of resistance. Understanding these issues is the first step toward fixing them. Because when you know that state aid is being cut, you can call your representative and demand a plan. When you know that your ID might not work at the airport, you can get it fixed, and then warn your friends and family to do the same. Knowledge transforms you from a victim of circumstance into an active participant in your own governance. It's the difference between being a passenger in a car careening toward a cliff and grabbing the steering wheel. And believe me, the dangers are not over. The issues we've discussed tonight are just the tip of a very large, very scary iceberg. The same mechanisms of quiet legislative changes and poor public communication are being used in other areas that affect your financial security even more directly. And this isn't some abstract risk. In fact, if you think this was alarming, you need to watch this next video right here on how your Social Security benefits could be frozen without any warning due to a little-known data matching program. Click here and stay informed. Your future may very well depend on it.